Before we talk about Alexander, before his name echoed from Greece to India, before armies trembled and empires fell, we must first understand the world that existed before him. This is not the story of a man who appeared out of nowhere. This is the story of a world waiting for someone like him. In the 4th century BCE, the world was divided, suspicious, and violent. Power was local, loyalty was fragile, and war was constant. Greece was not a country. It was not united. It was not even peaceful. What we today casually call ancient Greece was actually a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, Argos, each one proud, each one jealous, each one convinced it was superior to the others. They spoke the same language. They worshipped the same gods. They shared myths, poems, and heroes. Yet they hated each other. For generations, Greek city-states fought endless wars among themselves. The most famous of these was the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict that left Greece exhausted, divided, and weakened. By the time this story begins, Greece was no longer the confident center of civilization it once believed itself to be. Its glory had cracks. Its unity was a myth. And while the Greeks fought each other, something enormous existed to the east: the Persian Empire, the largest empire the world had ever seen. Persia was not just powerful. It was organized, wealthy, and cosmopolitan. It stretched from modern-day Turkey to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, touching the edges of India. Unlike Greece, Persia ruled through administration rather than chaos. Satraps governed regions. Road systems connected continents. Messengers crossed thousands of kilometers. To the Greeks, Persia was terrifying, but also fascinating. It was everything Greece was not: centralized, massive, unified. And yet, decades earlier, something unforgettable had happened. The Greeks had once defeated Persia, against all odds. Battles like Marathon and Salamis became legends, proof that small, free men could defeat massive imperial forces. But that victory came at a cost. Greek unity did not last. Instead of building on that moment, Greece turned inward again, back to jealousy, back to war. And while Greece argued, a new power quietly rose in the north. Macedon, not Macedonia as we imagine today, but an ancient kingdom the Greeks often mocked. To southern Greeks, Macedonians were half barbarians. They spoke the same language, but with an accent. They worshipped Greek gods, but differently. They lived more simply, more harshly. But what Macedon lacked in refinement, it compensated with discipline, strength, and adaptability. And then came a man who changed everything. His name was Philip, Philip of Macedon. Philip was not born powerful. He was forged by experience, hostage life, and observation. As a young man, Philip lived in Thebes, one of Greece's most advanced military states. There, he studied Greek warfare up close. He learned what worked and what failed. And when he returned to Macedon, he transformed it. Philip reformed the army. He introduced the phalanx, armed with long spears called sarissas. He created professional soldiers, not seasonal fighters. For the first time, Macedon was not just strong, it was modern. And while Greek cities argued in assemblies, Philip prepared in silence. One by one, Greek city-states fell under Macedonian influence, some through diplomacy, some through fear, some through force. Eventually, the impossible happened. Greece was united, not by philosophy, not by democracy, but by power. Philip stood at the edge of history. He planned something unthinkable, an invasion of Persia. For centuries, Greeks dreamed of revenge. Philip planned to make it real, but fate intervened. At a celebration, during a moment of pride, Philip was assassinated. The Macedonian throne stood exposed, and onto it stepped a boy, only 20 years old. His name, Alexander. But before Alexander could conquer the world, he had to survive his childhood. He had to be shaped. He had to be educated. And that is where the real story begins. Alexander was not born into peace. He was born into tension, ambition, and unfinished dreams. From the moment he opened his eyes to the world, Alexander lived in the shadow of greatness. Not imagined greatness, not legendary greatness, but immediate, looming, demanding greatness. His father, Philip, was a warrior king, pragmatic, brutal when necessary, endlessly strategic. His mother, Olympias, was something else entirely. Olympias was not just a queen. She was deeply religious, mystical, fiercely protective. She believed Alexander was destined for more than a throne. She told him stories, not like bedtime tales, but like prophecies. Stories where heroes were born of gods, where greatness was not earned, but inevitable. From a very early age, Alexander was taught a dangerous idea, that he was different, that his blood carried something divine, that he was not meant to rule Macedonia, but the world. Philip, however, believed in discipline, not destiny. Where Olympias filled Alexander's mind with myths and gods, Philip filled his body with training. He learned to ride before most children could walk properly. He learned to endure pain, to stand his ground, to never lower his gaze. But the relationship between father and son was never simple. Philip admired Alexander's intelligence, yet feared his ambition. Because Philip knew something dangerous, a son raised to believe he was destined to rule everything might not be willing to wait. Alexander grew up watching his father conquer city after city. He saw power up close, not as a concept, but as a living force. And slowly, something began to form inside him. Impatience. But before war, before conquest, came education. And not just any education. Philip wanted his son trained by the greatest mind of the age. So he summoned a man whose influence would echo for centuries. Aristotle. This was no ordinary teacher-student relationship. Aristotle did not merely teach Alexander facts. He shaped how he thought. Alexander studied philosophy, ethics, logic, politics, medicine, poetry. He learned Homer not as entertainment, but as a manual for heroism. The Iliad became his guidebook. Achilles became his model. Alexander did not want to be remembered as a king. He wanted to be remembered as a legend. Aristotle taught him something crucial, that a ruler must understand the world he conquers. That knowledge is a weapon. That culture can be as powerful as the sword. This lesson would later define everything Alexander did. But not all lessons came from books. Training intensifies. Harder drills. Faster movement. Alexander learned command early. At 16, while Philip was away, Alexander was left in charge of Macedon. A rebellion broke out. Alexander crushed it. Not with hesitation, not with mercy, with authority. In that moment, something changed. The generals saw it. The soldiers felt it. The court understood it. This boy was not waiting to become king. He already was one, in his mind. Alexander standing alone after the conflict. Silence. But admiration breeds envy. Philip remarried. Politics shifted. Court tensions grew sharp. Formal banquet. Forced smiles. Underlying hostility. Alexander began to feel threatened, not by enemies, but by succession. Alexander's clenched jaw. Would Philip replace him? Would another son inherit the throne? These questions burned quietly, dangerously, flickering torchlight in a corridor at night. Then came the moment that changed history. Philip was dead. Chaos erupted. Enemies moved fast. Philip was dead. Chaos erupted. Enemies moved fast. And Alexander did not hesitate. Rapid movement. Alexander putting on armor. Within days, rivals were eliminated. Dissent was silenced. The throne was secured. At 20 years old, Alexander became king. At 20 years old, Alexander became king. Coronation scene. No grandeur overload. Heavy realism. But kingship was not his goal. It was only the beginning. Alexander looking east again, longer this time. Because unlike his father, Alexander did not plan to invade Persia out of revenge. He planned to rewrite the world. He planned to rewrite the world. And before he marched east, before he faced the greatest empire on earth, he had one last thing to do. He had to prove to Greece that he was unstoppable. He had to prove to Greece that he was unstoppable. Pause. End of part 2. Atmospheric music only. Scenic ancient landscapes with epic music building toward the future campaign. Alexander did not inherit a calm kingdom. He inherited a powder keg. The moment Philip died, Greece began to move. Whispers turned into meetings. Meetings turned into plans. Athens questioned Macedonian authority. Thebes openly revolted. Others waited, watching closely. To the Greek cities, Alexander was just a boy, 20 years old, unproven, replaceable. They believed Macedon would fracture without Philip. They believed the moment was perfect. They were wrong. Alexander moved faster than anyone expected. before speeches, before negotiations, before mercy. He marched south with terrifying speed, not to talk, but to be seen. This was Alexander's first lesson to the world. Speed is power. Decisiveness is fear. One by one, cities submitted again, not because they loved Macedon, but because they remembered Philip. And then came Thebes. Thebes did not negotiate. They resisted. Alexander surrounded the city. He waited. He offered peace. Thebes refused. Alexander turning away. Subtle but final. What followed was not a battle. It was a message. The Macedonian army entered Thebes with absolute force. Streets burned. Buildings fell. Resistance vanished. Thebes was destroyed almost entirely. Men killed. Women and children enslaved. The city erased. Only temples were spared. And one house. The house of a poet. Alexander understood something instinctively. Fear breaks resistance. But symbolism shapes memory. Athens backed down immediately. So did everyone else. Greece was united again. Not by law, not by agreement, by terror and respect. Alexander had done what his father never fully could. He made Greece obedient. Now he turned east. But before Persia, before destiny, Alexander faced a different enemy. Doubt. Could a young king truly defeat the greatest empire on earth? Alexander answered that question the only way he knew how, by moving forward. He crossed the Hellespont, the symbolic gateway between Europe and Asia. Alexander stepped onto Persian land and stopped. He took a spear and hurled it into the ground. He declared Asia won by the spear. Not someday, not maybe, already. Soldiers watching in awe. This was not strategy. This was psychology. The campaign began immediately. The first major clash came at the Granicus River. Persian cavalry waited on the far side. High ground, strong position. Alexander did not hesitate. He charged straight into the river. Against advice, against logic, he led the charge himself. The battle was brutal, close, chaotic. At one point, Alexander was nearly killed, but he survived, and the Persians broke. It was more than a victory. It was proof. The boy king could bleed, but he would not fall. Greek cities in Asia Minor opened their gates. Persian control collapsed region by region. Alexander did not destroy these cities. He liberated them, citizens returning to streets. This was new, conquest without annihilation. He restored Greek governments. He respected customs. He punished only resistance. Alexander was not just conquering territory. He was building loyalty. And with each victory, his legend grew. But Persia had not yet responded with its full power. The true test was coming. A king awaited him, a king with unimaginable wealth. A king who ruled the world Alexander intended to take, Darius III. And when these two worlds collided, history would never recover. Music builds toward epic crescendo. End of Part 3. Part 4. Isis and the King of Kings. After the Granicus, the world began to whisper a new name. Not as a prince, not even as a king, but as a force that could not be ignored. Persia had underestimated him once. It would not make the same mistake again. Darius III now understood the threat. Not a rebellion, not a raid, an invasion. He gathered an army unlike anything Alexander had faced before. Men from across the empire, cavalry, infantry, numbers so large they blurred into the horizon. Alexander kept moving, not cautiously, not slowly, relentlessly. He pushed south along the coast, cutting Persian naval bases one by one. This was strategy disguised as momentum. By taking ports, Alexander neutralized the Persian navy without fighting it. Pause, then the terrain changed. Issus, a tight corridor between mountains and sea. Darius chose this place to fight. He believed numbers would overwhelm Alexander. Alexander saw something else. Limitation. The Persian advantage vanished in the narrow space. The battle began without ceremony. No speeches, no hesitation. Alexander struck the center, not the flanks, not the rear, straight at Darius. This was not reckless. It was calculated terror. As Alexander drove forward, chaos rippled through the Persian lines. Then it happened. Darius saw Alexander coming, and the King of Kings fled. The moment Darius ran, the battle was decided. Persian army disintegrating. Retreat becomes rout. Victory followed Alexander like a shadow. But something unexpected remained on the battlefield. Persian royal camp abandoned. Rich tents. Darius' family, mother, wife, children, captured. This was a moment that could define Alexander forever. History expected cruelty, revenge, humiliation. Alexander did none of it. He treated them as royalty, protected them, ensured their dignity. He treated them as royalty, protected them, ensured their dignity. This single act echoed louder than any victory. Alexander was not just feared, he was admired. Persian nobles watching, impressed. Darius offered peace, money beyond imagination, land beyond reason. Alexander refused. He did not want half the world. He wanted all of it. He marched south again. He marched south again. Cities fell. Some welcomed him. Some resisted. Those that resisted learned quickly. Then came Tyre. Tyre did not believe Alexander could reach it. So Alexander did the impossible. He built a road. Through the sea. Month after month, under constant attack, the road grew. Month after month, under constant attack, the road grew. When the city finally fell, the message was unmistakable. Nothing was unreachable. Ruins meeting sea. Egypt opened its gates without resistance. There, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. As a pharaoh, Egyptian priests greeting Alexander. He founded a city. He founded a city that would carry his name. Alexandria. This was not conquest. This was creation, blending of cultures, Greek and Egyptian imagery. But the war was not over. Darius still lived. And as long as he lived, the empire was unfinished. Alexander preparing to march again. The final confrontation was coming, a battle that would decide the fate of empires. Gaugamela awaited. Pause. End of Part 4. Part 5. The King of Kings. The night before Gaugamela was quiet. Too quiet. Alexander slept. His generals did not. Across the plain stood the largest army the ancient world had ever assembled. Darius had learned from every previous defeat. This time, he chose open ground. This time, numbers mattered. Scythed chariots. Cavalry wings. A king determined not to run again. Alexander rose before sunrise. He walked among his men, not to inspire, not to boast, to remind them who they were. He did not promise survival. He promised history. The battle began slowly, too slowly. Alexander refused to rush. He shifted his lines rightward. Darius watched, confused. Alexander was creating space. And in war, space is opportunity. The Persian chariots surged forward. Alexander had prepared for this. The chariots passed through and were destroyed from the sides. Pause. Then Alexander saw it. A gap. He did not hesitate. He never did. Straight at Darius. Again, the Persian center buckled. Darius looked up and saw Alexander coming. History repeated itself. Darius turned and ran. The Persian army broke completely. Gaugamela was not just a victory. It was the end. The Persian Empire collapsed in a single day. The Persian Empire collapsed in a single day. Alexander did not chase Darius immediately. He walked, because now the world was his. Pause. Babylon welcomed him. Babylon welcomed him with ceremony. Susa followed. Treasuries opening. Gold beyond counting. Persepolis burned. Flames consuming grand halls at night. This was not rage. It was symbolism. This was not rage. It was symbolism. Fire reflected in Alexander's eyes. Persia's heart was destroyed, but its people were not. Alexander adopted Persian customs, Persian dress, Persian titles. His generals were uneasy. Alexander was changing. He was no longer just a conqueror. He was becoming something else, an emperor. But one enemy remained. Darius still lived. Alexander pursued him relentlessly, forced marches through harsh terrain. Then the news arrived. Darius was dead, betrayed by his own men. Empty Persian camp. Stillness. Alexander stood over the body of the man he had defeated twice. He honored him, not as an enemy, but as a king. With Darius gone, there was no one left to conquer. At least, that's what the world believed. Alexander turning further east, mountains ahead. Alexander did not stop, because for him, the edge of the map was not the end. Fade out on endless horizon. Music builds toward grand finale, into Part 5. Part 6, the end of the world. With Persia defeated, most kings would have stopped. They would have ruled. They would have enjoyed victory. Alexander did neither. He turned further east. Instead, he turned further east, into lands no Greek army had ever truly known. Central Asia was not an empire. It was resistance without a center. Tribes, nomads, tribes, nomads, warriors who did not surrender when cities fell. This was a different kind of war. No palaces to capture, no kings to chase, only exhaustion. Alexander fought for years in these lands. He married Roxana, a local noblewoman. This shocked his Macedonian officers. Alexander was no longer pretending. He was building a new world. One culture, one empire, one identity. But the deeper he went, the further he drifted from his army. Then came India. Here, the world felt endless. Alexander faced war elephants for the first time. The battles were brutal. Victory came again, but at a cost. Alexander faced war elephants for the first time. The battles were brutal. Victory came again, but at a cost. Wounded soldiers, exhausted faces. At the Hyphasis River, the army stopped. They refused to go further. For the first time in his life, Alexander was told no. He argued. He pleaded. He raged. Nothing worked. He argued. He pleaded. He raged. Nothing worked. The army would go no further. Alexander turning away slowly. This was not defeat, but it felt like one. Slow march back west. The return was worse than the conquest. Deserts killed more men than battles ever had. Soldiers collapsing in heat. Alexander survived. Barely. Alexander survived. Barely. When he finally returned to Persia, he was not the same man. He demanded worship, adopted divine titles, expected obedience without question. Expected obedience without question. Some accepted it. Others resented it. Friends were executed. Trust vanished. Alexander had conquered the world, but lost his balance. Alexander had conquered the world, but lost his balance. And yet, he still planned more. Arabia, the West, the unknown. But time was running out. In Babylon, he fell ill. The greatest conqueror in history could not conquer his own body. Close-up of Alexander's face. Weak but alert. His generals gathered. They asked him one final question. To whom do you leave the empire? Alexander whispered his answer. To the strongest. Pause. Fade to black. Music builds toward emotional orchestral finale. The legend of Alexander. End of documentary. Babylon was silent. The city that had welcomed Alexander as a god now waited, unsure whether it was watching the end of a man or the end of an era. Alexander lay on his bed, weakened by fever. His body, once unstoppable, had betrayed him. For days, he could no longer speak clearly. His generals came one by one. Passing silently beside him. They asked him questions about plans, about wars. Then came the question that mattered more than all the others. To whom do you leave the empire? Alexander gathered what little strength remained, and he whispered, to the strongest. With that single sentence, Alexander doomed his empire. He died in 323 BCE, 32 years old. No clear heir, no plan of succession, no unity left behind, only ambition. Almost immediately, the men who had followed him turned on each other. Almost immediately, the men who had followed him to the ends of the earth turned on each other. The empire shattered, not slowly, violently. Within years, Alexander's generals carved the world into pieces. Egypt, Asia, Macedon, the Near East. They called themselves kings, but none of them were Alexander. And as the empire fell apart, a different question began to echo through history. Who is Alexander really? Not the conqueror, not the king, the man. Not the conqueror, not the king, the man. One question, in particular, has followed him for centuries. Was Alexander gay? The ancient world did not understand sexuality the way we do today. There were no modern labels, no categories. Relationships were understood differently. What we know is this. Alexander had relationships with women. He married Roxana. Later, he married Persian noblewomen. But the most emotionally intense relationship of his life was not with a woman. It was with a man. Hephaestion. They grew up together, trained together, fought together. They were inseparable. Ancient sources describe them as closer than brothers. Alexander compared their bond to Achilles and Patroclus. When Hephaestion died, Alexander collapsed. He shaved his hair, refused food. ordered public mourning across the empire. He honored Hephaestion as if he were royalty. Some historians believe their relationship was romantic. Others believe it was spiritual. Others believe it was emotional, spiritual, unbreakable, but not sexual. The truth is simple. We do not know, and Alexander himself never explained it. What matters more is this. Alexander loved deeply. Alexander loved deeply, fiercely, without restraint. And when Hephaestion died, something in Alexander broke. From that moment on, his decisions became harsher, his patience shorter, his belief in his own divinity stronger. Alexander had conquered the world, but he could not survive loss. And so the legend ends not with victory, but with fragmentation. Yet, strangely, this was not the end of Alexander, because long after his empire vanished, his influence did not. Music reaches emotional peak, because long after his empire vanished, his influence did not. Pause. Into Part 7. Part 8. The Legacy of the Great. Alexander was gone, but something far more powerful than an empire remained. Ideas. The generals fought over land. Borders shifted. Kings rose and fell. Yet across the conquered world, something unexpected survived. A shared culture. Alexander had not just conquered territory. He had mixed worlds. Greek language spread east. Eastern knowledge flowed west. This fusion became known as the Hellenistic world. Cities founded by Alexander became centers of learning, none more important than one, Alexandria. Here, knowledge was gathered, not to be hidden, but to be preserved. The Library of Alexandria did not exist to glorify Alexander. It existed because of his vision. He believed power without knowledge was temporary. Knowledge, however, could last forever. Books were collected from every corner of the known world. Languages translated. Ideas debated. Mathematics advanced. Astronomy evolved. Geography became measurable. Mathematics advanced. Astronomy evolved. Geography became measurable. This was not conquest. This was continuation. Alexander never lived to see this world fully formed, but it carried his fingerprint. Even Rome would later borrow from this blended culture. And centuries later, modern civilization would still stand on these foundations. Alexander did not rule the world forever, but he changed how the world connected. Trade routes expanded. Ideas traveled faster than armies ever could. This was his greatest conquest. Not land, but influence. Yet history does not remember him gently. Some call him a hero, some call him a tyrant. Both are true. Alexander built cities and burned others. He respected cultures and demanded obedience. He was brilliant and reckless. That contradiction is why he endures. Because simple men are forgotten. Complex ones are studied forever. Even today, generals study his tactics. Charisma, ambition. Alexander became a mirror. People see in him what they want to see. A hero, a villain, a visionary, a warning. But one truth stands above all others. Alexander was never satisfied, and that restlessness is what still speaks to us. Fade toward brighter modern light. Because the world today is built by people who refuse to stop at the edge of the map. End of Alexander the Great. Orchestral finale crescendo. End of documentary series. By now, you've probably heard the claim that Alexander conquered 80% of the known world. It sounds impossible, and in a way it is, because the ancient world did not measure itself the way we do today. There were no satellites, no precise borders, no global awareness. What Alexander conquered was not landmass. It was influence. From Greece to Egypt, from Anatolia to Persia, from Mesopotamia to the edge of India. He controlled the heart of civilization, the places where trade moved, where ideas formed. That is why his conquest feels larger than it was. Because he didn't just take territory, he connected worlds, roads converging from different directions. But myths grew quickly, stories expanded, victories became exaggerated, failures quietly disappeared. Alexander understood this better than anyone. He curated his own legend. He allowed myths to circulate, encouraged divine rumors. Let people believe what inspired them most. This wasn't arrogance, it was control, because belief is power, and Alexander ruled belief as effectively as armies. That is why modern leaders still study him. not because of his battles alone, but because of his presence. He understood optics, symbolism, momentum. But this brings us to a harder question. Was Alexander great, or just lucky? He inherited the best army of his time, exceptional generals, a weakened Persian opponent. Yet many kings had these advantages. None became Alexander. His difference was psychological. He believed completely, not partially, not cautiously, completely. This belief spread to his army, to his enemies, to history itself. But belief has a cost. Alexander never learned to stop. Alexander never learned to stop. He could not rule peacefully, could not settle, could not rest. That is why his empire died with him. Compare him to modern leaders. Some build systems that survive them. Others burn bright and vanish. Alexander burned brighter than anyone. And like all flames, he consumed himself, ash drifting away. Yet here we are, more than 2,000 years later, still talking about him. That alone says something extraordinary. Alexander did not give humanity peace. He gave it momentum. He showed what a single human will can do. He showed what a single human will can do, for better and for worse. And now, there is only one question left. Not about conquest, not about sexuality, not about numbers. The final question is this: why does Alexander still matter to us? The final question is this: why does Alexander still matter to us? Pause. That answer is the end of this story. End of documentary. Music builds toward epic series finale crescendo. The end. Part 10. Aftermath. Alexander does not live in ruins. He lives in ambition, in restlessness, in the refusal to accept limits. 2,000 years have passed, and yet his name still appears wherever power is discussed. Why? Because Alexander was not just a conqueror. He was an idea that says, the world is not fixed, borders are not permanent, and history bends to those who move first. This is why generals study him, why leaders quote him, why storytellers never let him die. Alexander showed humanity its extreme. What happens when intelligence, charisma, courage, and belief align without restraint? He proved that one person can change everything, but he also proved the cost. He did not build institutions that outlived him. He did not design a stable future. He moved too fast to stay. Alexander conquered the external world, but never mastered the internal one. That is his paradox. His greatness and his failure are the same thing. So was he a hero? Yes. Was he a destroyer? Also yes. Alexander built cities and burned others. He respected cultures and demanded obedience. He was brilliant and reckless. That contradiction is why he endures. What truly defined him was not who he loved, but how deeply he lived. He loved glory. He loved challenge. He loved the impossible. And when there was nothing left to conquer, he faded. Alexander did not fail. He simply showed us what happens when ambition has no ceiling. Modern civilization is built on his lesson. We expand, we connect, we push, but we also fracture. Alexander is not a role model. He is a warning, a reminder that speed without balance burns fast. That belief without limits consumes itself. A reminder that speed without balance burns fast. That belief without limits consumes itself. And yet, without people like Alexander, the world would still be smaller, less connected, less daring, less alive, less connected, less daring, less alive. That is why he still matters. Not because he conquered the world, but because he forced humanity to ask, how far can one person go? The final question is this: why does Alexander still matter to us? Pause. That answer is the end of this story. End of documentary. Grand series finale music crescendo. The end of the legend.